pod bay doors, please, Hal.
Travel forward with us, 300 years into the future, to confront the greatest mystery ever to threaten mankind. We are aboard a huge starship called the Enterprise. This is the return of Captain Kirk.
An alien object of unbelievable destructive power is less than 3 days away from this planet.
Mr. Spock.
I offer my services as science officer.
Dr. McCoy. Scotty. And joining them on their mission, Commander Will Decker and Navigator Ilea.
I'm sorry.
That you left Delta 4? Or that you didn't even say goodbye?
Get us back in impulse power. Full reverse.
Wormhole distortion has overloaded the main power systems. Belay phaser order. Fire torpedoes.
This, then, is the epic journey of the Starship Enterprise, traveling to the outer limits of time and space to challenge a vast, living machine of destruction. The human adventure is just beginning. Star Trek, the motion picture.
A Gene Roddenberry production, a Robert Wise film.
The pod bay doors are open. I'm your host, Doug Heller, film critic and film historian for TalkMovieToMe.com, here with Jerry Dean Roberts of ArmchairOscars.com and ArmchairCinema.com. Jerry, how are you?
Just a moment, Captain Sir. I'll explain what happened. Your revered Admiral Lagura invoked a little-known, seldom-used reverse activation clause. Simpler language, Captain, they drafted me.
Today, Bones and I are going to be talking about the first three Star Trek movies. Star Trek the Motion Picture, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Star Trek III, The Search for Spock.
Indeed. Welcome to Star Trek Month.
Yay!
We're finally here. We're at Star Trek Month, and we're going to talk about how many of these things are there? There are 13 of these things as of this report.
6, 10, 13.
And we're going to talk about 3 this week, 3 next week, then the Next Generation, and finally we're going to end up with the Abrams trilogy. And we're going to have a lot of fun with this, because I genuinely enjoy, unlike a lot of series, I genuinely enjoy these movies.
I do too,
even at their worst.
Even when they're bad, yeah.
Even when they're bad, you can still enjoy them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so episodic that you can't say that one installment destroys. You know, you can't really say that one installment will destroy the rest of the series.
I've always thought it was really fascinating that they serialize 2 through 5.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because, 3 is definitely a distinctive sequel to 2. 4 carries on that, and it all takes place over the course of like 3 months.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but yeah, there's what's called the Genesis trilogy,
mm-hmm.
which is 2, 3, and 4,
mm-hmm.
and they all kind of tie together. 5,
there is a tie at the beginning of 5, and we'll talk about that more. But at the end of 4, Kirk goes, when they get the Enterprise A, he says, "Let's see what she can do," and then they warp off. And at the beginning of 5, Scotty's grumbling because they gave him a piece of junk, and he's like, "Let's see what she can do. We saw what she could do," and that was a direct reference. And then that was it. That they got the Enterprise A, and Scotty hated it.
Well, let's talk about. We're gonna move directly into Star Trek: The Motion Picture,
Okay.
which people derisively refer to as the slow motion picture.
Well, I've actually heard this was described as the Star Trek movie that you show your child if you want them to be a Star Wars fan.
Or put them to sleep. Well, we have to talk about where this movie came from, because this series, and my dad watched the original series more than I did, because I was really young, and I think he watched it in reruns, and I would watch it with him just because I could watch a show with him, and I didn't really get it, but until I was older, but it was, for its time, really phenomenal.
Oh, sure.
You know, projecting this, this racial, this mixed racial culture within this working space, and all these different, and it was ahead of its time.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
5 years cut to 3.
Yeah.
Thank you, NBC. And it was one of the most requested shows to return. The letter writing campaign, that requested shows to come back that never did. And Firefly. They spent years trying to figure out how they were going to bring it back, and they sort of did, because they had a series in the 70s, but it was the animated series.
That terrible Funimation.
Yeah, the Filmation series. Yeah.
It's nice because they brought the actual voice. They brought the actual cast back for the voices, but some of the storylines were half decent too. But whew.
You could tell there was work in the script writing, but boy, that series was a block of wood.
Yes.
But they were still trying to figure out how to bring it back to television. They came up with this idea called Star Trek Phase 2.
Well, this was after Phase 2 was proposed by Paramount after Roddenberry had been pitching feature scripts for the better part of a decade. Like he wanted a movie back in the 60s. Apparently, he had declared that there was going to be a movie just before they started shooting the 3rd season. So, 68.
Yeah, the series ended in 69.
Yeah. So when they were starting to shoot the 3rd season, so in like 68, he's like, hey, he was at a convention, some sci-fi convention. He said, yeah, we want to do a movie. And then they canceled it, and then they were kind of kicking it around, and he's like, okay, how about...
Didn't they kick around a TV movie?
No, as far as I know, they just kicked around feature scripts.
Okay.
And they got rejected from Paramount like 3 or 4 times. One of them was like a reconceptualization of God, and they're like, yeah, we can't do that. There were other ones, and then they're like, well, this is a TV show. Let's keep it a TV show. Let's do Star Trek Phase 2, and we'll put it on TV. And then Star Wars happened.
Yeah.
And because Paramount...
Star Wars 79, while this script is in development.
Right. They were going ahead. They were going to start their own Paramount network, which they didn't do until 1996. UPN.
The United Paramount,
Yeah, UPN, which they used to launch Voyager.
Yeah.
After Next Generation and DS9 were such big hits. They're like, okay, well, now we can start our own network. And then that failed.
Didn't UPN fold before Voyager was done?
No.
I remember.
Maybe, but I know that they merged with the WB and became the CW.
Okay.
In some way, shape, or form. But yeah, so they were going to do this, and then they had this 2-hour series premiere script ready to go, and Star Wars hits, and Paramount is like, do we have any properties that might be like that? This is Walter Koenig remembering it. He was like, do we have anything like that? Oh yeah. And then they're like, well, let's make it a movie. And they said, well, we need a script. And they said, well, here's your 2-hour series premiere. Why don't you make that into a feature? There's your feature right there. So
You have to know, in 1978, every studio in Hollywood was killing themselves to get a science fiction movie made.
Yeah, trying to ride the coattails of Star Wars.
Everybody was trying to remake Star Wars, and it's kind of comical if you look at how many science fiction movies were made in '76 and how many were made in '78. It's really fascinating.
The black hole.
Oh God. Even Disney was chasing it. You know, and 20th Century Fox was chasing it because they had Alien. You know, everybody was trying to make something. But I'll give them credit for this. The credit that I will give Star Trek the Motion Picture. They didn't try to make it into Star Wars.
No, they really didn't.
Their vision was...
This was a Star Trek-ized version of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
It was.
Even down to some of the set design. If you look at when Kirk's trying to figure out where he is on the redesigned Enterprise, the hallway behind him is the 2001 hallway.
Right, and the docking.
Oh yeah.
And all of that, the slow motion docking and all of that. That's all 2001. At least they were chasing a great movie. I mean, they weren't just trying to stamp Star Wars on this. There's not a laser battle ever in this movie.
No. The only thing that they do is they fire one photon torpedo at an asteroid that got drawn into their not a wormhole when their intermix chamber was off on their warp drive when they first tried to go into warp. They're like, oh, it's a wormhole. It's like, that's not a wormhole. Whatever it is, it's not a wormhole. But they had to shoot the asteroid, and that's the only time a weapon is discharged in the entire movie.
Yeah. Because this movie is about exploration. It's not about... and this is something that really irritates me, because this is something the Star Trek movies have gotten away from. Because I guess the brass at Paramount was really scared to death of making a movie that's not about battling something. And the exploration and going out there and finding out what's out there has long since gotten away from this series. You have to go to television to find any of that. Right.
Yes. Because...
But this one can be credited for at least having some of that.
It does. It very much plays like an extended episode of the show, which is exactly what it was going to be. A 2-hour season premiere became a 2-hour and 13-minute feature-length film.
Depending on which version you have.
Well, yes, the theatrical cut was 2 hours and 13 minutes.
The extended edition is slightly better, because what the Star Trek the Motion Picture is missing is a lot of the relationships.
Which got cut out.
There's a lot. Yeah, which got cut out. There's the performances, because of that, feel very dry.
Yeah, and regrettably, the Blu-ray box sets that they put out in 2009, those are the ones that I have. I had the DVDs that all had the extended editions, so 1, 2, and 6 all had director's cut extended versions of the DVDs.
Yeah.
The Blu-rays just put out the theatrical releases.
Oh, that stinks.
Yeah. So I would probably have to buy them independently of the box set to get the extended editions again. Because I sold the DVDs before I realized that I was going to be losing the director's cuts. But...
Well, one of the things that really was lost in the theatrical version, the byplay between Bones and Spock is one of the most fun aspects of the original cast.
Oh, yeah.
In the theatrical cut of Motion Picture, all of that byplay is gone.
A lot of it is, yeah.
Gone. It's really not there. And a lot of the movie, and I noticed this the last time I saw it, they were running a marathon in January that I didn't get a chance to rewatch this one again recently, but I've seen it so many times. I mean, like Poltergeist, I don't need to watch it again. A lot of the movie is the cast just staring at something.
Yeah, see, this was directed by Robert Wise, who the two-time Academy Award-winning director of West Side Story, Sound of Music, the man who edited Citizen Kane, the man who, at the studio's insistence, and for him to keep his job, he is also the man who butchered the Magnificent Ambersons, and you know, he directed the Cat People and the Sand Pebbles, and this was his first and only sci-fi film.
Yeah.
I don't know that he necessarily knew what needed to be done for this. He was a talented director. You can't really take that away from him. His staging, especially in West Side Story, is really good, and the Sand Pebbles.
I want to correct you on one thing. He did direct a sci-fi movie before this.
Oh, the Andromeda Strain.
The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Oh yeah, so he did too.
One of the greatest science fiction movies of all time.
Right, but not an effects-heavy one.
No. It was like this. It was more about ideas.
Right.
His movies, his best movies are always intelligent. That's what I love about them.
The Andromeda Strain's pretty good too.
The original, not that TV thing. The original is really good. But the problem is, he went into this not knowing anything about Star Trek.
Right.
He sat down and he watched a lot of it, but he was not a fan. He had never seen it.
He was their fourth choice for director too.
Oh God.
Their first choice was Coppola, but he was off going crazy in the jungle making Apocalypse Now. Their second choice was Steven Spielberg. Their third choice was George Lucas. Mm-hmm. They wanted to bring George Lucas in. And then their fourth choice was Robert Wise. And it's funny that they wanted George Lucas, because it's the symbiosis between these two, despite the rivalry between the fan base, is George Lucas openly admits that Star Wars wouldn't have happened without Star Trek.
Star Trek, yeah.
And William Shatner said the Star Trek movies would never have happened without Star Wars. So they are intrinsically linked, yet the fan bases tend to be very adamantly opposed to each other. You and I are two of the very few vehement supporters of both franchises.
Right. At their best and their worst.
Yes.
Because they are two completely different things. And people always ask me that, but, well, what's the difference in Star Wars and Star Trek? I said, well, one is a fantasy, and the other tries to be a futuristic reality. Mm-hmm. And the trick is, with these two series, they are spiritual cousins.
Yeah.
They're two different sides. They're two different approaches to science fiction.
They're two sides of the same coin. You know.
Yeah, one is a fantasy, and the other's, because Star Wars has nothing to do with our reality. Star Trek has everything to do with our reality.
Right. And you could easily put Star Trek in the early days of the Star Wars galaxy, while they were still exploring and expanding. Yeah. Before space travel just became something anybody with a few credits could buy a ship and jump planets and be there, cross the galaxy in less than a day. Like a couple hours.
Well, let's move to motion picture, because this is a movie that people are divided on. I honestly, and this is how I see the motion picture, for my money, for my personal sanity with this continuity, to me, this is the final episode of the original series.
Yeah, it's definitely...
And then Wrath of Khan begins the movie series.
You're right. And it functions as a pilot for
Yeah.
itself for the movie series, because when you watch a pilot, it's seldom the characters are seldom the same as they are later in the series.
Right.
Even if it's not a serialized character growth series, the pilot, things are different.
Yeah.
The pilot of Seinfeld was very different from the second and third episodes, and the first season was very different from the rest of them. So when you look at it that way, this was the pilot for the movie series, and I like how it's the end of the Star Trek series, because they say they were out there for 5 years. I think the
Yeah.
animated series was the last 2 years.
Mhm.
Or supposed to be the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And then he got promoted, and he's been 2.5 years as an admiral in charge, rear admiral, lower half, and he was Starfleet operations for 2.5 years before the events of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So this is really 4.5 years after the last episode.
Yeah.
Of Star Trek.
They do. I will be honest. When I was watching this, all I kept thinking about is the first probably quarter of this movie is the Blues Brothers, because
They're getting the band
they're
back
getting the
together.
band back together. Yeah, they have to go. It's like almost like they have to go visit everybody. The movie has to go visit everybody to get them to come back. And they're generally moving. They're all generally have moved on to their other stations, their other things. And some of them have moved, like Bones have moved into semi-retirement.
Well, he left Starfleet anyway.
And left Starfleet. But the movie begins with this a very, very good idea if you're going off of what the series was about, which is that you have this thing
Right.
that is destroying everything in its path.
Why is it that we always call something we don't understand a thing?
Because that's what it is. It's something.
That is a quote from the movie.
Yeah. But they, and I love, by the way, and you probably don't know this if you're not watching the behind the scenes. They tossed the Klingons in here.
Mm-hmm.
They tossed the Klingons in here because I think some studio exec was like, no, we've got to have a Klingon in here somewhere.
Yeah.
Because the original script had no Klingons,
right.
But they're basically, I love the fact that their first response to this is, well, we don't understand it, so let's start shooting.
That's within the series. That is the Klingon response to pretty much all of it. Yeah, that I was wrong. They shoot one torpedo as well, and
yeah, that's true.
The
Klingon.
The Cloud does destroy 3 vessels with projectile energy weapons.
Oh, and by the way, somehow the Klingons seem to have evolved from the little beatnik. They're not the little beatniks anymore. They've now become crustaceans. Which they do explain.
That is an internal matter, and they do not discuss it with outsiders.
It's a long story.
That was from the Trouble with Tribbles episode that DS9 did when they traveled back in time. They're all looking around, and the commissary, and they're like, "Oh, all these Klingons are here," and Bashir and O'Brien are like, "Where? There, and there." And they're looking at him, and they're just like tan people. And they look at Worf, who's sitting right there with something covering his head. And he goes, "We do not discuss it with outsiders."
I gotta say, I love the Klingons from the original series. Little beatniks with the little cookie dusters. What was the commentary there?
All right. Well, they were supposed to be the Russians, which I don't. And if you really want, we can go into why they now have ridges and why they didn't have ridges and why they did have them in Discovery and in
We'll
Enterprise
get
and
to that.
Discovery, but not in the original series and why they did after.
We'll get to that.
Explain that in Enterprise.
Anyway, this movie, like I say, it turns into Blues Brothers where they have to get all the people together.
Well, yeah, they have to reintroduce everybody.
Oh, one by one.
Yeah,
almost.
Because it's
I think
it's been 13 years since the series was on television at this point.
Right.
Or 10 years at least.
And I think they reintroduce this. They reintroduce Bones. They reintroduce Scotty. They have to go and see what's going on with Spock, who, by the way, was not supposed to be in this movie originally.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Robert Wise is fighting. No, you can't have Star Trek without Spock.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It doesn't work that way. But he reluctantly, they had to practically drag their way into this movie, and he gives a performance that kind of shows that because he's very, very stoic.
He is just there. He
is just there.
And
he is.
I mean, he gives a much better performance in 2, but I think that's because he knew that
everybody does.
Well, yeah, everybody does. I think that's like Shatner's career best in anything and performance-wise. But I think Nimoy really turned it up because he thought that this was going to be the last time he ever had to be Spock.
Nobody ever tried to excise themselves from a role more than Leonard Nimoy did.
He wrote a damn book, I Am Not Spock, that he had to retract years later after he came to terms with the role. He said, I am Spock. It's like,
I am Spock.
It's,
he's like, you know what?
He finally accepted his role in pop culture, and
it may have been a little pillow talk because so the wife may have been like, you know what? Those pointed ears put a roof over our head.
Yeah.
And our kids in college. So just shut up and accept your destiny, okay?
Because it certainly wasn't the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins paying the bills.
No, but it should have been.
I know, right?
I love the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins. But anyway,
you need to put a link to that.
I definitely will. I was
here
just thinking
because that is one of the most amazing things. Outside of William Shatner talk singing Mr. Tambourine Man and Rocket Man.
And kind of a catchy song, actually.
Yeah, it is.
But they do. Like I said, they go through this movie, and the first quarter of this movie to get everybody on board. Spock's not even on board when they launch.
It takes forever. Yeah, they have to get a shuttle to come and drop him off, and
Nimoy's not wanting to be there is seen in the first time he sees when Bones sees him, and he says, "So help me, I'm actually glad to see you." And he walks by him and he says nothing.
And he's like, "Okay."
He doesn't smile. I don't even know if he looks at him. He just does nothing.
See,
so help me, I'm glad to see you, and nothing.
The best part of that is that is fully explained within the movie.
Yeah.
Because he had just come off of
the Kolinar.
2.5 years of the Kolinar, which is purging himself of all emotion to achieve total logic. So he'd been on Vulcan, around Vulcans, in the middle of this desert, which, I mean, Vulcan is not the most picturesque planet anyway.
No.
But
not according to this movie.
Well, I mean, then you see it in Star Trek 3, and see it in other. It's just red dirt, and it's not a nice place to be. It's hot. You realize why they had to become logical, because otherwise they would have just been angry at the weather and just killed each other.
Because now they're supposed to purge themselves of all emotion and just be logical. Well, boy, they're dramatic.
Yeah, they are, right?
Because she goes to put the necklace on him, she realizes that he stops her, and she realizes that he hasn't purged himself. And what does she do? She just drops the necklace.
Yeah. It's like, this is supposed to be some sort of a big deal, this traditional thing, and she just drops it. It's like, he could pick it up and just go somewhere else in the universe and be like, hey, I have the Kolinar. Right.
It's like she drops it almost like a ribbon of shame or something, you know?
It's... and so he comes back, and he's very curt to everyone because he's been around Vulcans without feelings for years. And he's gotten to the point where he had kind of always been trying to be during the series. But, you know, he was always plied by human sentimentality. And, you know, he loosens up near the end. Yeah, he is half human. I really liked how they reintroduced everybody. I liked how Kirk was basically just running on arrogance this whole time because he hadn't been on the ship since it was redesigned, and it took 18 months to redesign. Like, that is a long time from little...
Yeah, it's a long time. They do this thing where, and you can tell... The seeds of a pilot, of a TV pilot, are here. Because the whole damn movie, he's consistently and constantly fighting with this young officer.
Right.
Played by Stephen Collins. That's the whole dramatic character drama.
Right.
Is these two guys fighting.
And Decker and Aaliyah were supposed to be regulars in the series.
Right, right.
And they probably figured that they weren't going to get Leonard Nimoy, so he was going to be the first officer, and they were going to do a second 5-year voyage out with Decker first in command, or for first officer.
And if you'll excuse me for a second for being a bit off color, I got to talk about these uniforms, because these uniforms are very, very flattering.
They're very 70s.
There's a conversation between William Shatner and Stephen Collins where he's standing in a hallway, and you see him from the knees up, and you can clearly see who's the bigger man. It's not... It's right there. I mean, it's like... Honestly, when I watched this the last time, that scene stopped me. It's like, wow, your costume designer couldn't go back in there. And that's their whole relationship, is this male ego thing.
It's a pissing match, basically.
It is.
That's all it is. And I love... One of the weirdest introductions is Lieutenant Aaliyah.
Played by Perseus Khambatta, who was a wonderful actor.
Yes, she was. She passed away from cancer, I think.
92.
Yeah, not that long after this. About a decade and a little bit more. But she walks on the bridge. They say whatever species she is. Right before she walks in, and the turbo lift doors open, she walks in, head shaved bald. All the men immediately look like they need books to be in front of them.
Right.
And they're like, Kirk is like, oh, welcome aboard, and she goes, my vow of celibacy is on record, sir. And
the first thing
she says.
Just to shut Kurt down.
I mean, it's like they couldn't find a better way to just work that in somewhere. No. She just, first thing out of her mouth, all right, boys, put it away. I don't do that. And if I was going to, it would be with Decker. Okay.
She's a Deltan.
Yeah, yes.
Because they have a previous relationship.
They do.
And it's a very sweet relationship until she turns into a being that only knows the words Kirk unit.
Did you notice when you were watching this how much of this ended up being Encounter at Farpoint for Next Generation?
I never thought about that.
Most of this, if you look at it, so there's this brash young officer who becomes first officer, named Will,
Mm-hmm. Oh.
who has a previous relationship with somebody who comes on, Deanna Troi, left when he was a young officer stationed on the planet. Riker was on Betazoid.
Yeah.
He was on Delta 5 or 4 or whatever, wherever he was, and struck up this relationship and then left to pursue his career just like Riker does. And then they meet up later. They took the whole... And then if you watch Farpoint is like an enslaved being that can make things just whatever you want generate.
Right.
And they took a lot of the concept for what V-Ger was and made it into Farpoint Station. It's funny how much of Star Trek 1, including the title music, became part of the Next Generation.
I think they did it better in Encounter at Farpoint.
I think they did too. But
it only took 45 minutes.
No, that was a 2-hour premiere.
It was 2 hours and 90 minutes.
Yeah, but still.
this one, honestly,
there was more than just looking at the screen.
Yeah, and honestly, this one, once they get going, again, spends a lot of time looking at stuff. And they discover that whatever's this cloud is something called V-Ger. And
they find out that they eventually discover that it was the lost Voyager 6 probe.
Yeah.
And Spock mind melds with it and finds out that it got sucked into, they say, what used to be called a black hole. Like, black holes don't exist then, but they do. It gets sucked into what is actually a wormhole, not what their warp drive creates.
And Kirk and Deckard are arguing while they're in the tail of this comet.
Right. So the probe ended up on a planet of living machines, which later on, after Encounter at Farpoint, Gene Roddenberry said that might have been the Borg homeworld.
Yeah, that's true.
He didn't say for sure, but he said it's possible. Even though Spock, when he was going through, he's like, there are whole galaxies worth of information that was stored there that he found, like multiple galaxies. So, but then Kirk was like, it must have gotten thrown to the other side of the galaxy. It's like, well, if they got thrown to the Delta Quadrant, that's where the Borg were, and 300, 400, 500 years previous, they would not have been as far advanced as they were at that point when the Next Generation crew meets them. So maybe it is actually the Borg.
It'd be interesting if they tied it together officially.
Yeah.
Because the Borg were actually really an interesting idea.
Yes.
The soulless collective following.
The Borg are seriously the single most terrifying thing to ever come out of Star Trek.
And they have an evolution.
Yeah.
They have a very interesting evolution, because if you watch the series, they're not the same when we get to First Contact as they were when we first met them in the series.
And then once you get to all the interactions with Voyager and the Borg, because Voyager was out in the Delta Quadrant, they eventually stumbled upon them. They're even more evolved and different at that point. It's cool.
It is. It's interesting, but this again, this whole living machine that they're inside of is where the movie starts to slow down, because they want us.
And it was already pretty slow.
It was already pretty slow. It was already going in slow motion. But once you get inside of V-Ger's head, for lack of a better term, in the cloud, the movie wants you to understand just exactly how infinite this is,
Mm-hmm.
that takes a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of time. And it just there are scenes in this movie where they're just flying through it and you're just looking at it.
Right. There's a big attempt, and I noticed this not this last time, but a couple of times before when I was watching it. Um, this is where they really try to get their 2001 mojo.
Yeah.
When Spock is trying to go through, and I'm quoting, the V-Ger orifice.
You could have crossed that out and written something.
Which is literally an enormous contracting and restricting sphincter that is like breathing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he has to get the timing, and he goes through it, and there were other ways that they probably could have done that, but
are you kidding me? There's a space vagina in this.
Yeah.
I mean, it literally at one point they're flying through it, and it's like, guys. I think the designers were kind of probably maybe a little pissed at their, I'm guessing they were kind of irritated by the low pay, so they were like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to have a laugh for myself.
Like, well, we can't do the Stargate. Let's make space vagina.
Right. And
so, I mean, the whole thing, when you really break it apart, this is a very interesting movie. It's a very fascinating movie. I get if they'd have sped it up, it wouldn't have had the power that it eventually really does have at the end.
Rushed.
Yeah, it would have felt rushed. Instead of feeling like it was all filler. Like this, I like that it takes its time because it is probably the truest expression of the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's actually less like the show. When you go back and rewatch the original series, that was as much an action adventure show as the alternate timeline movies with Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto and everything.
Right.
It's a lot like that. There were a few episodes where they really, like bottle episodes, ship in a bottle episodes, where they really slowed down and investigated and did slower paced investigation and exploration stuff. But for the most part, it was, we found this place, we're going to talk to these people, they mean to do us harm, we're going to shoot them, and then we're going to run away. That was most of the episodes of Star Trek, the original series. Not to take away from it, because it was an excellent show. I love the show. I've seen it. It was an excellent show, but more than once. I've seen the whole series, but
where I start to get irritated with this movie is when they, at one point, the probe that whatever is on ends up on the bridge, and it's this swirling sort of vortex, and it grabs hold of Ilea and turns her into a probe.
Right, it digitizes her and recreates her physically, and has this big brooch in her neck.
If you looked at this script, if you took out every use of the words Kirk unit, you would lose half an hour of this movie.
At least.
She says Kirk unit so many times that it's... I would love for somebody contributing to the IMDb trivia page to count how many times she says that and post it, because I can't get through this movie enough to do that. I'm telling you, every time you see her after that, Kirk unit, Kirk unit, Kirk unit, Kirk unit, Kirk unit, stop!
Yeah.
And by the way, Perseus Kambata, who was a really delightful actress, after this point, to say that her performance becomes one note,
Hmm.
you kind of get it, but she kind of becomes a little irritating after that.
Because her entire performance is then done through an audio filter,
Right.
and she's just yelling.
I did like the part where she walked through the wall. That was interesting.
Yeah, they like took precautions to lock the door so that they could go talk in private, and then she just walks through. And
I'll tell you who I really feel bad for in this movie. I feel bad for Chekhov. I feel bad for Sulu, and I feel bad for Uhura. They get really nothing to do in this movie.
they really have nothing to do. It's and they give Uhura some of the weirdest lines. Like when Spock comes back and everybody's kind of crowding around and he doesn't really care. He's like, "Can I go give these fuel equations to the engineer?" Not to Scotty, to the engineer. And he stops in front of the turbo lift and everybody's like waiting for him to be like, "Hey, it's good to be back." And Uhura goes, "It's how we all feel." Well, what is?
Yeah.
Nobody said anything except Bones.
Yeah. Well, and Bones is the only person in this movie who's really given any kind of life or spirit in the character, because you expect him to have all of that, the cranky old,
Right.
cranky old dialogue.
He's the one that really maintains his character.
Yeah.
From the series and actually builds on it. Kirk is very much a man with something to prove in this, which is weird because he got promoted to admiral for all of the great things that he did while he was out there. Like, but still he thinks that he's got something to prove to this kid that he recommended for the command of his ship. Like, I don't really get his motivation outside of wanting to get back on the bridge of the Enterprise. That's
the most Shatner line in this movie is when he says, "Stop competing with me there." Of all of the movies, I think this has the most Shatnerisms.
Well, yeah, he was getting back into the swing of the character.
Yeah. But it's the old sage trying to school the young kid who knows a lot from training, but the older man knows the experience. But a little of that goes a long way.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of it, and by the end, when they actually are on there and V-Ger disconnects its transceiver so that the creator has to come up to it so it can merge with the creator, assimilate, and evolve. That he gives his life to it because Aaliyah's in there too. And it's like, Kirk is like all starting to get broken up over it. It's like, you hated this kid.
Yeah.
You gave him command strictly because you weren't allowed to be there anymore. And the first opportunity you had, before the thing even left space dock, after being refitted, completely rebuilt, they should have just built a new ship with everything that they had to do to this thing. Because the ship was already over 10 years old before he got it, and then it was out there for another 5, and then...
And there's this whole thing about Deckard has been overseeing the refit and all of that, so he knows the ship better than... But, again, it goes a long way.
It really does. There's a whole lot.
The only really emotional moment in this movie that really works, because they take stabs at emotional stuff, but largely it doesn't work. The only emotional moment happens when Spock tries to mind meld with the cloud, and he comes back and he realizes that it's searching for something. It's trying to find a purpose and meaning.
He comes to the realization that pure logic ends up being limiting instead of enlightening. And that was his whole... He was there for a purpose because he could sense this consciousness, and it basically tells him the folly of his pursuit, and basically
That may be the best scene in the movie.
Oh, absolutely. And like they try at the end too, when Uhura's like, "Oh, Starfleet wants to know casualties and everything." He's like, "List 2 casualties: Lieutenant Ilea and Captain Decker." No, wait. Don't list them as casualties. List them as missing. Like he's starting to get broken up over it, and I'm like, you didn't care about Will, and you wanted to sleep with Aaliyah, and that was your only real connection to her.
She shut that down real quick.
Yeah.
The thing that I think really works for this movie is eventually its destination. Because when you get to the end and you realize V-Ger is basically Voyager 6, the space probe sent out to search for signs of intelligent life. And it brings it back home, because that's what the best of Star Trek always did. It brought it back home.
Mm.
And it's this whole thing, in the words of Walt Kelly's Pogo Possum, we have met the enemy and he is us.
Mm-hmm.
And that ultimately is what this story is that we have created our own doom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a subject that would be revisited later. They did that in Star Trek 4.
Which is basically, the story is different, but the plot is the same as this.
Right. Done, I think a whole lot better.
Yeah.
They're trying to go for a 2001 experience, a cinematic experience.
Mm-hmm.
But it ultimately it is at the cost of a lot of human interaction, a lot of character development, a lot of things that
a lot of Star Trek.
Had this become a series, would have become
right.
better developed.
Mm-hmm.
Here, it's very, very stiff, and it doesn't work. Largely it doesn't work.
Right.
Because it does leave a lot of threads hanging.
But what it does is renew interest in Star Trek and bring in money so that we can get Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which is not only a great Star Trek movie, I think it might actually be a great film.
A great movie itself, yeah.
And there are a few plot holes that you could drive a truck through, but it doesn't matter because it's just so damn entertaining and so well put together.
You don't care.
It's so well put together. It's so well acted. So everything just clicks and works so brilliantly in Star Trek II that even the questions that it leaves, like, where did the Genesis planet come from? Because they were in a nebula when the thing blew up.
Right.
And the Genesis wave went out and created a planet without a sun, but then it had a sun. Like, I don't really know what was going on with the whole Genesis planet. And then when they go back to it in 3, none of that makes any sense whatsoever.
If you follow the logic of any of this, if you follow the logic of any science fiction, you're going to find plot holes.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the thing is, the Genesis Genesis device is just that. It's a plot device.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because where I felt that the first movie, and by the way, Star Trek II is probably the greatest do-over I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. This is a reboot.
This is a reboot. Others can claim it. This is a reboot. Because where the first movie was lacking in all real human relationships, this one is swimming in it.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are themes about relationships between friends, relationships between family, estranged families, their mistakes of the past.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great overarching theme about aging,
yeah,
which movies generally are afraid to do.
Oh, that whole underpinning, with Kirk feeling old on his birthday, and I love it. Damn it, Jim! Other people have birthdays. Why are we treating yours like a funeral?
Yeah, you notice how many movies are afraid to do that.
Oh yeah, and it is very
afraid
much
to admit that their characters are old.
very much confronting mortality and feeling like your best days are behind you, even though they were only in their 40s at this point. But
yeah,
it's
well, but they're also actors.
That's true.
And an actor in his 40s now, for men, it's not quite as harsh.
Right, but even at that time,
right,
they look like they're in their late 30s and early to mid 40s, but they look like they're older because you just looked like you were older then. Like when you watch the Golden Girls and realize that most of them are in their 50s and they look like they're in their mid 60s. It's like, wait a minute, how old are these people? But you know,
they sorry, go ahead.
It's this brilliant confrontation juxtaposed with this thing that can create new life. And it's revealed that Kirk has a love of antiques, and you know, Spock gives him for his birthday A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, which when you really boil this down, this is like the perfect combination of Moby Dick and A Tale of Two Cities.
Yeah.
Which you would never really think that Melville would go well with Dickens, but it does. It really does.
It merges very, very beautifully.
It does.
A very, very, very rare that a science fiction movie is so literal and deals with literature in that way.
Yeah.
This is not the end of this, by the way. They would do this in Next Generation all the time.
Oh yeah.
They would deal with Shakespeare. They would deal with all kinds of different ideas.
The holodeck really let them explore a lot of literature, classic literature, and they made sure that they talked about music and stuff like that. The
holodeck is the one piece of Star Trek technology that I want in my living room.
See, I wouldn't want to sit there and live the stories. I'm perfectly content to read or watch. I want a transporter and a replicator.
Yeah. Yeah.
Personally, that's what I want, to end hunger and having to drive places.
Right.
You're there 2 seconds later. You could traverse the globe and you know.
I would love for the world we live in to be able to get past the need for money.
Mm-hmm.
That would solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, it would.
But anyway, this story, he's feeling his age. His birthday comes around. He's moping around, and then
gallivanting across the cosmos is a game for the young.
Right. And Bones is upset because he's basically driving a simulator.
Yeah.
He's training young kids.
Yeah.
And
after he retired from Starfleet and came back and retook his admiralty, something like close to, I think he spent like 5 or 6 years out of Starfleet, and he was going to get married, and then he went back to Starfleet, took his old position. Then he went back to train. He went into the academy, into training. So this is like set something like 10 years after the first film.
And by the way, the movie opens beautifully.
He has one of the best reveals in movie history.
It opens with this, and it's what do you call it? It's a trick opening because you're not sure, because you're on board a ship with this training crew, and they encounter the Kobayashi Maru test, and they get this they get a distress call from this ship that's inside the
Klingon
neutral zone.
Mm-hmm.
And the ship is in trouble, so the captain has to decide: do I break the rules or do I follow command? What do I do?
Right. Do I sacrifice these people in the name of preserving the delicate peace, or do I go in and rescue these 348 people, breaking the treaty and risking a war, which would cost a lot more lives?
Because ultimately, no matter what you do in this situation, you're going to have to answer for it.
Right. It's the wrong choice. It's a no-win scenario.
Right.
Which is why it's set up for you to be able to, as a commander, deal with life and death decisions that that aren't going to have a rosy outcome.
Right. That you can't follow by the book.
Right. Because if you do, then 350 people die, but if you don't, then you could start a war and billions of people could die.
Right.
I mean, there is a lot of moral philosophy at work there that, you could like really, I think, Kierkegaard your way out of this. This is a trolley problem, like, to the nth degree.
Well, they by the way, the person running the simulator is Lieutenant Savick.
Yeah, she's in command. It's her test, her captaincy test.
Played by Kirstie Alley, who, by the way, was beautiful.
Yes. This was her first feature film. This is before she went on Cheers.
Before she really became a comedian.
Mm-hmm. This launched her career, so much so that when they came back for Star Trek 3, they had to recast Savick because she's like, yeah, I'm not coming back.
Well, there was a problem because by the time they got to asking her to come back for Star Trek 3, the contract negotiations had closed, so she wouldn't be able to. So they wouldn't be able to be flexible with it.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I've heard, and so she decided not to do it. So they got this other actress, Robin Curtis, who's fine, but
yeah.
But they do this. But anyway, the reveal. Talk about the reveal, because I love this reveal.
When they... All right, open it up. After everything gets blown up, they get destroyed by Klingons.
Everybody dies except Savick.
Everybody dies. And then you just hear... Like, you hear her going, all hands abandon ship, repeat, all hands abandon ship. And then you just hear this siren, this klaxon, and then you hear Kirk. All right, open her up. And the front panel, like the view screen and everything, opens, and he is backlit with this blue light that he kind of walks in. He's got this book under his arm, holding his belt buckle, and then he's like, lights. And then you see his face, but you just see him backlit with this back spot. It's so cool.
That's a great reveal. And by the way, you said it before. This is Shatner's best performance.
It is.
And he's given a great role to play here.
Yeah. This is the most nuanced anybody ever actually let him play any character, let alone Kirk.
And he's a good actor with the right material.
He is. When he's allowed to be. His episodes on the Twilight Zone were really good. And even when he does Star Trek 6 with the same director, he turns in what's probably his second best performance of his career.
And he gives a good performance in Star Trek 3.
Yes, he does.
It's not written as well, but it plays basically the same notes as this one, but it's still a good performance.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a fully realized character because he realizes that, and everyone around him realizes, he's squandering his potential.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's getting older, but he's not old. He's not walking around with a walker or anything.
Right.
He still can get out there. They say Hopping Galaxies is a game for the young. But you also realize he's got the know-how and he's got the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that whole Captain Decker thing. It's like you've got a young person, and they've got training and they've got all of this. They're good at what they do, but they haven't been in the field,
Mm-hmm.
and they haven't had to face the Kobayashi Maru. They haven't had to face what is it his son says at the end of this movie? You never really have faced death.
Right. No, and he says he cheated it, worked around it, tricked his way out of death. But it's
And there's this whole thing with he hasn't seen his son in years.
he's never seen his son.
He's never seen his son. Apparently there was something going on with the Carol Marcus,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this whole thing where they split apart. She had his son. And
She got pregnant. She told him she was pregnant. She told him she was having the baby. She told him his name, but she also said stay away because how could his job not look cooler than hers? And so she wanted
well,
him.
and she wanted him to be a scientist,
right.
but in also, and this plays into the Shatner character. How many more Davids are there out there?
You know what? That is an excellent question.
Because Kirk got around.
According to the official stance on Captain James T. Kirk, James Tiberius Kirk, as it's revealed in Star Trek VI, David was his only child that that was known about and that lived. He did get married, and his wife died, and there was an unborn child. But as far as the Memory Alpha wiki goes, there are no other bastard Kirks running around the galaxy.
I still say there's a green love child running around somewhere.
with an Orion slave girl, like they would have been allowed to keep it. That's a whole other.
That's another show. But we they kind of work these character details into this other plot where they're trying to find a planet for the Genesis project.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got to be a dead moon. It can't have anything on it at all. Because what it does is apparently is it terraforms.
It terraforms, but where terraforming can take decades, this takes minutes. Here's plot hole number 1 for you.
Here we go.
So when they're talking, and they're gonna go to Regula 1 after they find out, and Kirk says to Spock, "What about the planetoid beyond?" And he goes, "It's Regula 1. A bunch of unremarkable ores. It's essentially a great rock in space."
Right.
Why didn't they terraform the top after they figured out that inside they could terraform the middle? Why did they have to go looking for another planet? There was one right there.
Right.
Right there. Why did they have to commandeer a Starfleet vehicle to run around and get, like, the only black captain killed?
Mm-hmm. Poor Terrell. Poor Terrell. He just,
I mean, it's later you find it by Star Trek 4 you find out that what is it, the Eddie Murphy's mom from Coming to America is also a Starfleet captain, and there's actually an Indian, and there's a Brock Peters who famously played in To Kill a Mockingbird, and later was Captain Sisko's father, plays an admiral.
Good actor. Very, very good actor.
Brilliant actor. I was so sad when he died. Anyway.
It's an interesting idea, let's just say, terraforming this planet and I imagine that if a corporation or an entity like the United Federation of Planets would probably reject a line like "whatever we see fit to deposit on it."
Because you could make a prison planet. You could do like, yeah, it's that
That's
line is
probably an
troublesome.
unwise
Yeah,
political move politically.
yeah, that line is troublesome in the pitch, but there it is anyway. And
There it is anyway. Well, the whole idea behind this thing would be controversial anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Because, what are you doing? What do you, the whole idea behind this wouldn't.
And then, the first thing that jumps into McCoy's mind is, well, what happens if it's used on a planet that already has life? And Spock is like, well, it would destroy it in favor of its new matrix. And then McCoy gets ticked off, and Spock is like, look, I wasn't trying to go for the moral implications. I'm just simply telling you what it would do. Mm-hmm. And that's why the Klingons are like, oh, they were developing this doomsday weapon. Well, that wasn't the intent of it at all. The intent was to end intergalactic hunger and overcrowding problems and being able to get sustainable worlds.
It wasn't intended to be a weapon.
No, but it definitely could be.
I think David actually says it could be perverted into a terrible weapon.
Mm-hmm.
In searching for this, they find a planet that might be suitable. But there's something tiny on it. So Chekhov and Terrell go down to find it, to figure out what it is. Well, they find a cargo ship.
Yep. Called the Botany Bay. Which
someone's living there.
Which, by the way, the Botany Bay is a port in Australia that the prisoners, when they were taken to the prison continent of Australia, when it was still a British colony, that is where they were delivered. It was to Botany Bay.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
That's interesting.
So,
I did not know that.
The SS Botany Bay, this cargo ship that had the frozen, the popsicle people from the 90s, Kahn Noonien Sung, and his followers were deposited there after they tried to take over the Enterprise in the Season 1 episode called Space Seed. Now here's... It's a great episode. Here's plot hole number 2. Chekhov wasn't on the show then.
I can answer this one. There is either a deleted scene or a part of the script for Star Trek II in which he is doing research. And he's just going through old files and things like that. Comes across this information about what happened years ago when this crew got a hold of the ship and tried to take it over. And so it's not in the movie. So in the movie, it looks like a giant plot.
But Kahn walks up to him and says, "But I never forget a face. Chekhov, right?" It's like, well, even if he was trying to figure out what happened, the only thing I can think of is that maybe, I don't know if they've retconned this or not, but Chekhov was an ensign when he was on the ship.
May have been in a different part of the ship.
He may have been not yet the navigator, because that's senior staff. He's an ensign. He could have been assigned somewhere and been on the ship, and Kahn has a great memory, so he just might have had a different duty and had not been on the senior staff yet.
Was he the navigator, or was he on the weapons?
He was the navigator. Sulu was the pilot and also shot the phasers, because they didn't have torpedoes on the original one, or if they did, they never used them. Sulu
We're
was,
geeking out, by the way.
right. Sulu was always the one who fired the phasers. Later on, in the movies, he became the security tactical officer.
Okay.
Still kind of remained the navigator, but was largely the security and tactical person. But yeah, he was the navigator when he was an ensign. So basically, they said, "Okay, plot a course for this place." So he would type it in, and then send it over to Sulu's screen, and Sulu would push the button for how fast they had to go.
Right. He was the accelerator.
Right, and
He did the so
he would like
Chekhov
turn
did
the wheel.
GPS.
Yeah.
Chekhov did the GPS.
He was the person in the passenger side with the map.
Right. Right. Well, and you talked about Kirk's entrance. To me, this is my favorite entrance.
When he pulls off the Mad Max clothing.
These are Mad Max people, by the way.
To reveal a man who is in his early 50s.
Yeah.
Surrounded by people of whom he says that they were sworn to live and die at his command hundreds of years before Tyrell was born, yet they're all in their 20s.
Yeah. Well, late 20th century genetic engineering, let's don't forget that.
Yeah, but he aged. Why didn't they?
Because
they're not the same actors.
He, by the way, looks like... well, now, remember, he killed 20 of his people.
Yeah.
But don't forget, also, I cannot move forward without this. Ricardo Montalban looks like David Bowie in Labyrinth. The people around him look like the dancers in Staying Alive.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
And go back to our Saturday Night Fever episode. You got to listen to the end of that because that's hilarious. Anyway, they discover probably what has got to be the most cringe-worthy torture device I think I've ever seen. Saw could wish to be this cringe-worthy. Okay. Discover
the little armadillo creatures.
Right.
Oh, digging into the ear.
Pull the little things out of their back and dump it into your ear to make you more susceptible.
It wraps around your...
When they are finished with you, you will go insane and die.
This
and
thing
watching
is
these
crazy.
Things crawl in their ears.
I mean, you can even, you look at it now, and when it's going into Chekhov's ear especially, you know, you can look at it and you see that it's a papier-mâché ear.
Right.
But it's still terrifying. And then when it comes out later, that's the grosser part. Because it comes out in this flood of blood, and it's less obvious that it's a papier-mâché ear. And it's grown. Ugh.
And it's meant to keep them under control. And
the only thing that's grosser was in Prometheus when that thing went in the guy's eyes.
Oh yeah, yeah. Or if you ever see the DVD box cover of The Strain.
Oh.
With the crawling out of the eyeball.
Yeah.
But Kahn tells this story that really cements the character because they were supposed to be on this planet where they were exiled by Captain Kirk.
Right. They were on Ceti Alpha 5, which
they were on Ceti Alpha 5.
Life. It was a lush planet.
Right. And 6 months later, there was an explosion.
Mm-hmm.
And it shifted the orbit and turned it basically into Tatooine.
Yeah. Only much worse.
Only much worse.
In a perpetual sandstorm, and it didn't even look like it was hot. It just looked like it was like a cold desert, which is the worst.
And if the people didn't die from the elements, they died from these little armadillo arms.
It's so bad.
And Kahn makes the point of letting everybody know that one of the people that died was his beloved wife. So it's personal.
His wife...
It's on.
His wife, who was an Enterprise crew member that fell in love with him and got exiled with him from the space seat.
Right.
She was an officer on the Enterprise, and she betrayed them. She fell in love with him, and yeah, she died from armadillo brainworm, and
yeah, that's a good word. I like that, the armadillo brainworm.
and they think that they're on SETI Alpha 6, but they're really on 5, which is where they were marooned. SETI Alpha 6 was supposed to be lifeless. Nobody knew that this explosion had happened. And so, which seems weird, but Kirk didn't care. He knew that he couldn't get off of the planet, so whatever. But then he hijacks the
And by the way, nobody ever came to check on him.
No. Well, why would you? Because as soon as you get down there, they end up hijacking your ship. Like
Right.
they did.
Which they did.
With oh, what's the name of the ship?
The Reliant.
Reliant. Thank you. You know, and they get off. They strand the Reliant crew on SETI Alpha 5 in their place, and they run out to, you know, go blow up Kirk. After they find out about Genesis.
Yeah. And by the way, Ricardo Montalban.
Oh man, he is so good at this.
He is so wonderful. He is everything you want a villain to be.
Oh man.
He's big. He's over the top.
He's
spiteful.
Spiteful. He's hateful. He's quoting Melville.
Quoting Melville, rather. Sorry.
He's smart enough to outsmart the heroes, but not smart enough to consistently outsmart the heroes.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's able to get the upper hand. He's able to cripple the Enterprise and really make Kirk look like an idiot. And it's wonderful, the dynamics between the characters and the dynamics between Kirk and Kahn. And it's this beautiful interplay between it's kind of like it's the person that you don't really care that much about, but they hate you.
Yeah.
And then you find out how much they hate you, and you're still just like, whatever. I'm mad at them for what they're doing right now. I didn't even have a second thought about them until all this stuff happens.
Yeah.
And I think that ticks off Kahn even more than having been marooned. that Kirk is like, yeah, I remember you, but I didn't really care about you in the first place.
These guys are basically extremely smart, extremely intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
Kahn, because of his superior engineering or superior genetics, they're always trying to outdo each other, and that's the whole crux of the movie. And the funny thing is, they never have a scene together.
No, they don't.
They're never in the same room.
Mm-mm.
But they're always one-upping each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a scene where Kahn goes to Space Station Regular 1, and he kills everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And steals the Genesis device. And when Kirk goes to investigate, basically maroons him there.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to maroon him there. And Kirk plays it. Is smart enough to play it so that Kahn thinks he's won. That's why we get good That's why we get that.
Kahn! And then when his ruse is revealed and he's like, okay, patch me through, and he says, Kahn, we tried it once your way. You game to try it on mine? And you just see this look on Kahn's face like, how are you on the Enterprise? Ah! And like Kirk knows how to goat Kahn, and he knows how to get him. He knows how to rile his blood and get his passions to overcome his intellect, which is to say that he's laughing at his superior intellect, like, aha.
Yeah, he actually says that.
Yeah.
I'm laughing at his superior intellect.
Like, jeez. So all of this happens to get us to, they finally beat him in an awesome game of Battleship.
I gotta mention this. When we talked earlier about this does not try to be Star Wars, this series is not trying to be Star Wars, this is where I really came to that, because the space battles are very nautical.
Yes.
They're there's a point where they're hiding out in a cloud.
In a nebula, yeah.
In a nebula. And they don't know where each other
right,
are.
Because the static discharge in the nebula disables their sensors and their shields. So basically they're on an even playing field. They only have their view screens. Neither one of them has sensors, and they have to figure out where the other one is, and they're just flying around in this nebula. And
at one point you see them cross each other.
Right. One of them's down below, and the Reliant goes over top, and they're like, they finally realize, Spock realizes that Kahn may be intelligent, but he's not experienced, because he's thinking on a two-dimensional level. He's thinking of this as a pitched field and not a 360-degree, you can go anywhere kind of field of battle, and that's where Kirk beats him.
This is where you needed a Betazoid.
Yeah.
This is where you needed Counselor Troy.
She would have come in real handy here.
She would have come in real handy in this scene, because and again I say it's like you've got two ships on the ocean, and it's in total fog.
Mm-hmm.
They can't see each other, but it's three-dimensional. It's not a flat playing field. So when the static does clear, they're like yards away.
Yeah, they are very, very close.
Yeah, I mean they're right there.
Yeah.
In the whole infinity of the universe, they're right next to each other.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They're almost touching, and it's that is very much not a Star Trek, because this was a battle of patience and will, instead of flying around and shooting at as much as you can, hoping that you're going to.
Well, they do that.
They do, but it's not the escape from the Death Star. It's not,
right.
Just two guys in guns shooting at a couple of things, and then they get away. And this is an intellectual.
This is a strategy game.
Yeah, this is strategy. This is
Stratego,
which they did actually. I think they made a Star Trek version of. Or catalog.
Oh god, they made a Star Trek version of everything.
Right. So they finally get Reliant crippled enough that, Kahn's last ditch is to start the Genesis torpedo, because the Enterprise can't get away. They can't hit warp from all the damage.
The Vengeance is right at the top. It is driving everything. Even when his son tries to tell him, we have what we want. We can go anywhere. We have a ship. We can go anywhere. We can do anything we want. But Kahn has these blinders on.
And he's so focused and so intent on making everything Kirk's fault that when the bulkhead falls on the kid, he holds him up.
Shed of Angel.
I shall avenge you. It's like, you would have to go after yourself because you are the reason that he is dead.
Yeah.
This isn't Kirk's fault. Kirk is defending himself.
Yeah.
It's your insistence and your unwavering lust for revenge that killed your entire crew. It's your fault. And he refuses to take responsibility for himself. Why? Because he is an ancient despot that had at one point ruled Asia. So
He's crazy.
he is. He had at one point ruled, I think, a quarter of the world.
His final pronouncement, and he makes a lot of pronouncements, is straight out, is literally quoting Moby Dick.
Yeah. Oh.
From hell's heart I stab at thee.
From hell's heart I stab at thee. For hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee.
Right.
Like,
because they can't get away because the warp drive is not working.
Right. And he's like, oh no, you can't get away that easy. And that leads directly to one of the saddest things in any movie that has ever happened to anybody, anywhere.
Well, yeah.
The
tragedy. And the relationship, by the way, between Spock and Kirk is built up in this movie so beautifully. There is a scene, I think if any filmmaker working today, any studio executive working today, this scene would have gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's a scene earlier where he's sitting in his quarters, and Kirk comes in and says, I don't think this crew is ready. I'm going to give you command of the ship.
Well, because he was the captain.
Yeah. Spock says, you approach from a
you proceed from a false assumption. I am a Vulcan. I have no ego to bruise. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one, so you're experienced, you take command.
They're absolutely one with each other.
Yeah.
They are such good friends.
Yeah.
And then you arrive at this ending, in which Spock has basically taken this advice to heart and has gone in and basically, and they kind of a little bit throw this away in part 3. He mind melds with Bones first.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes in and he's trying to get the mains back online so that they can get away. But in doing so,
he exposes himself to a lethal dose of radiation.
Right.
And
which, by the way, if he had done that, his hand really should have burned off.
Well.
But
yeah, he should. If he'd have gotten into a suit, he probably would have been fine. But
he didn't have time.
Right. So he goes in and he sacrifices himself.
Which, by the way, I feel so bad for the guys working in engineering in this movie because those poor guys.
Well, I mean, and then you even get the director's cut when they're in the surgery when Bones can't save the kid,
yeah.
Peter Preston, and it's Scotty's nephew.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's even better in the extended version.
That's what I mean, because you don't know that he is the nephew in the theatrical version. You just think that he's upset because he was a brave kid because he stayed at his post when the trainees ran.
Yeah.
But then you find out in the extended version, in the longer scene, that is his nephew. That's his sister's son, firstborn. Right. And he couldn't protect him, and Scotty is just ripped up one side and down the other.
Right.
Because there's
a big mortality rate in this movie.
Oof, it's tough. It's really rough. And
even a suicide in this. I mean, Terrell killed himself.
Yeah. Well, technically, so does Kahn.
Yeah. Well, but Kahn does it
He blows himself up with
It's
the
funny.
Genesis torpedo.
Right.
It's still a suicide, even if
But
it's
the
a
scene
suicide bombing, basically.
But the scene of Spock's death,
Oh,
there's a lot to it because the movie built to it and allows the moment some weight.
the ship out of danger.
And they have this moment. They can't.
They're separated by the glass. Otherwise, the radiation will flood the entire compartment and kill everybody.
Probably has one of the most touching funerals
Oh.
I've ever seen in a movie. By the way, they launch him out into space and he's sent to the Genesis planet. And
This
it's
death
really,
takes place in the shadow of new light, new life that our colleague and friend gave his life to preserve and protect. Of my friend, I can only say this. Of all the souls I've encountered in all my travels, his was the most human.
Yeah, they did it in. Yeah,
Oh,
still get you. But the funny thing is, because it's Spock, he's coming back. Again, remember when we were talking about motion picture when he was really trying to get out of this series?
yeah.
I think this was the caveat for him coming into this movie.
It was. He wanted to die at the end, and the only way they got him back for 3 in the limited capacity, they let him direct and co-write the story. Or no, he didn't do the story for that one. That was Harv Bennett and Nick Meyer. Nicholas Meyer, the writer-director.
I think he did the story for 4.
He did the story for 4. And he had story and screenplay credit for 4. And I think partially 5. He had producer credit on 5. But
they did this thing where it has a beautiful ending where they're looking at the Genesis planet and he quotes the end of Tale of Two Cities. And she says, he says, it's a far better thing that I would do
than I've
ever
ever
done.
done.
She says, is that a poem? And he says, no, it's just something Spock was trying to tell me
On my birthday. And the beautiful thing is that that really does echo, especially the end of A Tale of Two Cities.
Yeah.
When I can't remember, I read it so long ago, and I actually had to watch the movie so that I would know what the devil was going on, because you don't know what the book is about until the end. Yeah. Like, you're following all these different characters, and you're like, I have no idea what the story is about. And then at the end, you're like,
Okay.
So Ronald Coleman sacrifices himself for a girl that he kind of loves, but is in love with somebody else. So he sacrifices himself so that her boyfriend, lover, husband doesn't have to die.
Right.
And that's exactly what Spock has sacrificed himself so that his friends can live. And yeah, I mean, not only did he say, I want to die, but boy, did he make them put him out on a high note. Like,
yeah, he goes out. He gets a beautiful send off, and ultimately Star Trek 2. The reason this movie works, it is everything great about Star Trek.
yes.
It is dealing with its own past. It is dealing with the characters, the relationships. They're written well. This movie was put together, I can tell, with a lot of passion. There didn't seem to be a lot of meddling. There didn't seem to be a lot of unnecessary passages.
No,
there
and
were interesting characters, even the smaller roles.
It's Nick Meyer's best movie as a writer director too. I mean, the only other thing that comes close, other than this and Star Trek VI, was what was it? Time After Time or Somewhere in Time, the Christopher Reeve time travel story.
No, it was Time After Time. I think it was Malcolm McDowell.
Yeah. No.
He played.
He didn't do the Christopher Reeve Somewhere in Time or schmaltzy weirdo time travel love story.
I don't think so.
Maybe it is somebody else. Maybe it is Time After Time that he did, but it's still not that good. He was largely a television director. Oh, and by the way, even though we're not on that movie, um, it is today in 45 years where we make first contact, according to First Contact, April 5th, 2063. We're recording this on April 5th, 2018. I just wanted to throw that out there. But so
Okay.
uh, it's
We're gonna
clever. I think it's cool.
we're gonna move very quickly through Star Trek 3 because there's not a whole lot to talk about.
Star Trek 3 is
It's a large epilogue.
it is. It's good for, but it's not. There's a lot of problems with it. It's entertaining.
Yeah.
It's well done. Nimoy does make a pretty good debut
Director.
as a director, but
But it's really a functional script because, like I said, this is an epilogue, and it really deals with. Basically, they send him to the Genesis planet, and they got to go get him.
mm-hmm.
And they get stopped by the Klingons, who, by the way, are really effectively making their debut in this movie. They were in the first one for a minute, but they're really making their debut. Played
Right.
by Christopher
Lloyd.
In a very
1.21 gigawatts.
played, played by in a really, really fun performance.
Mm-hmm.
After Kahn, anybody would seem like a step down, but he does play. And I like the idea because this is, what was this, 84?
Yeah.
This was when we were still in a tiff with the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this paranoia. The Klingons think that they're going to use the Genesis devices to take over.
Mm-hmm.
But so they try to go get it.
This has. And I'm jumping ahead here. This is after David gets murdered and
Yeah, they kill David.
Yeah, they just write out
well, not right out because they're going to kill Savick.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you find out who he is in one movie, and the very next movie, gone.
Yeah.
And I think it's funny that the actress who played Carol Marcus, Bibi Bresch.
Bibi Bresch, yeah.
Apparently did not even want her footage used in this one because when you watch the Genesis proposal footage, all of that is done by Kirk, and it is line for line what she did in Star Trek II. In the archive, in the archive footage of the pitch, he does it word for word as though that's what we saw in Star Trek II. But it's not. Like, I don't think she wanted anything to do with this movie.
Why? I wonder why that was.
I don't know, because she would have gotten a paycheck even for an archival spot,
But this movie is very functional.
Yeah.
The idea is they've got Bones who's got basically Spock is in his head.
Spock on the brain.
It's got Spock on the brain. They've got to go to this Genesis planet, which, by the way, has become controversial.
Well, it would have.
You've got to break all the rules to get there.
Right, and them stealing the Enterprise is so much fun.
Yeah.
When they finally get to it, and I don't know what kind of coat Sulu's wearing, but it's like a leather coat, but it doesn't have sleeves, so it's a button in the front cape kind of. I don't know what it is, but it looks fantastic, and I hope George Takei got to keep that coat because that is an awesome.
And I hope he wears it.
I hope he does too because that is an awesome coat. Anyway,
everybody in this movie kind of gets their moment, kind of gets to play around a little bit more than they did in the other one. This is a good movie. It's not a great movie, but it's a good movie. It's basically just a destination film.
Right. It's fun and it does have some of my favorite Kirk lines, which is when he's fighting the Christopher Lloyd Klingon at the end. He finally gets him over a cliff, and the guy just grabs his leg, and he just takes his boot, and he just kicks him in the face, and he goes, "I have had enough of you!" And then he falls into the lava. I love that. And then he beams up, and there's one guy left on the crew. There's one Klingon left, and
it's John Larroquette.
Yeah, and he's like, you said
said you would kill.
You said you would kill me. He goes, I'll kill you later.
Yeah,
I love it. There are some great Kirk moments.
there's some great moments in this.
Yeah.
I love the scene where they have to blow up the ship.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that is the second saddest thing to see in Star Trek.
And they have to they do this thing where they go on board and the ship is counting down. He sends the crew on the board.
Like the only thing
is they go to the planet.
The only thing that's talking is the computer. Let me hear. 5, 4, 3. Get out! Get out of there! 2, 1. Come. And the shot that
Sorry
you
about
get
the
of
crew, as we say a word.
The shot of it burning up in the atmosphere. Then
it calls back to that whole thing about mortality.
Right. I don't really understand why that happens, because if you follow Star Trek, you know that the self-destruct initiates a warp core overload, which blows up the whole ship from the middle out, and not just the bridge and the front. But the visual is spectacular when they're falling, and I think that that is just one of the great things.
What I love about this is when they finally get to the Genesis planet and they find Spock. He's aging rapidly, but when they find him, he's going through puberty. And they try to wave it off with this Ponfar thing, but I'm thinking, he's going through puberty.
Well, see, okay, the Ponfar... The Ponfar is difficult. It is not the only time that Vulcans mate, but this is when they have to. And Vulcan males go through this every 7 years of their adult life, presumably starting with their first pre-puberty, post-puberty, and it's a burning of the blood. It's so bad.
I'm to presume by this movie that they mate by rubbing fingers.
Well, there's a telepathic connection that can satiate the urges. Basically, if a Vulcan is in the Ponfar, and the women have it too, if they don't get satiated in 8 days, they could die. They could literally die from being too horny.
Harsh.
I know.
Because they do this thing.
Talk about pressure to get laid. I mean.
Yeah, no kidding. They do this thing in the second one where it's all the human characters. This one really gets into the species details, because I love the fact that the Klingons operate on this mafia mentality. Because when the female Klingon sends down the information, he says, "Have you seen it?" She says, "I have." So they blow her up.
Yeah,
and she's okay with it.
He's like, "Unfortunate," and she goes, "I understand."
She's cool with it.
And it's his girlfriend or his wife or something. It's like, she's like, "Good luck, success, my lord, and my love." It's like, wow.
She's cool with it.
Like, if you're not coming from having seen Star Trek: The Next Generation, that's how I came to Star Trek, was The Next Generation. So I had already learned a lot about the Klingons. But then, if you're coming into it with this, like, this is brutal. Yes. And, then they get Spock back, and they put his Katra back in his head, and he's a little disoriented, but he remembers all the people.
Extremely disoriented, because he doesn't even know who Kirk is.
Well, then he goes, "Jim, your name is Jim," and then they all run up and touch him, and
then the eyebrow. Right,
and he looks confused and concerned, and then it's over. It's
again a fun epilogue.
It is. It's a fun. It's a good middle part to what ended up being a trilogy. Next time.
One last thing I got to mention about this movie: small cameo by Dame Judith Anderson. who we loved in Rebecca as the maid. We loved her. I love Judith Anderson. She was great.
Wasn't it? She was also the person that gave him the Kolinar necklace and then threw it on the ground.
No, that was a different actress.
Okay.
That was a different actress.
But yeah, definitely Mrs. Danvers.
Mrs. Danvers, yeah.
She's
wonderful.
She's much more palatable here as a person.
That's DePaul.
Yeah. Yet she's still just kind of cold. So I think that wraps it up here. This is going to lead into, obviously, we already spilled the beans. We're talking about 4, 5, and 6 next time.
That's going to be next week.
Star Trek 4 is so funny.
So is Star Trek 6.
Yeah, it is.
And they both have issues, real issues to deal with.
Right. Whereas in Star Trek 5, we have issues to deal with.
5 is Shatner's ego project.
Did you notice?
Oh my God!
Did you notice though that 3 is the one where the special effects start to get worse, because all of the ships are just like lit as though they were surrounded by light, but they're not. Whereas it looks like a television production. In 1 and 2, mostly in 2 specifically because they recycle a lot of the footage from 1 of the Enterprise. It's just lit by the running lights. Something that they do in 6 as well. But in 3, 4, and 5, it's just this bombardment of light because they were subpar special effects. 5 is where it gets the worst.
Let's just say all 3 of these movies look different.
They do.
Because of different creative decisions.
Mm-hmm.
They all look different.
And then later because of budget.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing next time. I don't know if I have any recommendations other than watch the TV shows and watch the movies.
But watch the extended. That's my recommendation. Watch the extended version.
They do tend to flesh things out a little bit more. Like it makes Wrath of Khan even better. Yeah. In parts.
Oh yeah.
The director's cut of 6 is not really worth the time or effort, because it recuts a few things that I don't like how they do it. But we'll talk about that next week.
Okay.
I think that about wraps it up here on the Pod Bay Doors. Thank you very much for listening. On behalf of myself, Doug Heller, film critic, film historian for TalkMovieToMe.com, and on behalf of Jerry Dean Roberts, film critic for ArmchairCinema.com and ArmchairOscars.com. You can find us at www.thepodbaydoorspodcast.wordpress.com. You can find us on Twitter at pod_bay. We thank you very much for listening, and the Pod Bay Doors are now closed.
The mission has been complete.